When we talk about work, an important perspective and conversation that is a part of how we understand work is how we think about our time away from work. And it may be ironic to think that when you talk about work, you need to talk about not working, but central to how God designed us to operate as human beings is that rest is a key part of being human, of being who God created us to be and operating in our work and out of our work in an emotionally healthy way. Now, many of us, when we go to work or when we think about our work, the way we think about rest is we just work really hard so eventually we can take some time off. So I work and I push and I grind and I do everything I can because a couple weeks from now I've got vacation. And so I'm working for vacation. Or I work and I'm just, as soon as I go to work on Monday, I'm just counting down the days till it's Friday and I know 4 o'clock's coming, I'm getting out of here. We're working to get to the weekend. We're working for the day off. We're working for the vacation. The challenge, though, with that is God didn't design us to work so that eventually we get time off. God designed there to be a rhythm to our life. Actually, from the very foundation of creation, He created Adam and Eve, and they are made in the image of God. They're given good work to do, and the first thing they experience is rest. That they are given Sabbath to rest and enjoy God's creation. And then flowing out of that, there is this rhythm of 6 and 1 and 6 and 1 and 6 and 1, a sense where they are designed to operate in sync with this rhythm of how God created them to be human. And for many of us, we are trying to live life by our own rhythms. That eventually when we start to feel the weariness and exhaustion, like then we know our bodies need rest. Eventually we get to the point where we realize we're going to hit a breaking point or our family's not happy and then we rest. The problem is when we do that, we miss out on what good we could do by being emotionally healthy, by being people who work from a position of rest. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, the Apostle Paul has this phrase that I love how he says it. He says, "Let us not grow weary in doing good." And if I think about our work as being something that is good, it's a gift from God, I think that encouragement is so helpful because he says, let's not grow weary in the good you have to do. Let's not grow weary in the good you have to do in your work. Let's not grow weary in the good that you have to do in your friendships, in your family, for your kids, for your neighbors. And there's a reality to that Paul says that because work is tiring, because work is exhausting, that there is a weariness that comes over time. But Paul says we need to find a way to orient our life so that it prevents the weariness. Because if we can fight and resist that weariness, that we can actually do more good for the people who need it. The way we prevent that weariness is rest. Rest is the resistance to weariness. Now, when we think about rest and work and the relationship between those things, I think there are a few different temptations we can fall into, a few different equations that we live our lives by. One would be rest without work. Rest minus work, that equals laziness. Now, some of us, that's the temptation. That happens when we view work as a curse. We talked about this in the first episode, that work is not a curse. Work is actually a gift. But for many of us, we are looking to offload work, to run away from work, to avoid it, to just go to the beach, to hang out, to read a book, and just live life that way. Now, when we have rest but don't have work, usually that's not attached to being in the presence of Jesus, because I would argue that if we are resting and being in the presence of Jesus, He will also lead us to work. And maybe that's not paid work, it may be some of the volunteer work or the work in your family, some of those things, but Jesus will point us to work to do. Because the rest will fuel the good that God wants us to do. Jesus will help you know who you are, know the opportunities you have, know the good he wants you to do. Jesus doesn't want you to rest for the sake of avoiding work. Jesus wants you to rest and to take that fuel with you into the work you have to do. There's another equation that we could fall in the trap of, and that would be when work is greater than rest, what we see as idolatry. And so what happens for us when we struggle with that temptation, I often feel like this is my own tendency, is that I know rest is important, just the work I have to do is really important. And so I create this scale of sorts and like, all right, well, if what I have to do is so urgent or so valuable that then I will shift my schedule and say, well, I just one more email or just one more phone call. The problem is that usually happens at the expense of something else. Maybe it's at the expense of my own relationship or time with Jesus, or maybe it's at the expense of my family. The problem is that happens because I think I'm so important or my work is so important that it can't wait. And so I avoid practices like taking email off my phone or not responding to a text message because it's my day off or my Sabbath. And so what needs to happen is a shift to elevate the importance of rest. Because what will happen is if we don't do that, if we don't shift those priorities, the crisis will demand that you keep working. And it's in those habits and those rhythms that you create in your life that actually prepares you to make rest a priority even when things are hard. A third equation that we fall into the trap of that can build on these other ones, or it can be one you just alternate between, but that would be when you work and don't rest. Work minus rest equals burnout. Eventually, you'll have to rest. And that happens sometimes for some of us because you've worked so hard and eventually your body responds in a way that it forces you to rest. You get sick, or maybe your family experiences you're working in such a way that they tell you it's us or work, like you need to decide. Or maybe your employer experiences the damage that's been done to you emotionally or physically because you've worked so much that you can no longer do the work that you need to do. And that's called burnout. And what happens is we've tried to work, but we've never had a chance to recover. Anybody who's done any kind of training, whether that be weight training or training for a marathon or practicing a sport, in all of that, not only is the work and the hustle you put into the work important, it's also the recovery and the rest. Because it's in that time that it's rebuilding the muscles, that it's helping your mind learn and cement certain practices and habits into you. And so Paul encourages us to not grow weary in doing good. The way that we prevent that weariness, the way we resist it, is by rest. It's why I attach to that command the promise of Jesus when he says, "Come to me all who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." Because it's when we know the rest that Jesus offers, when we know that Jesus carries our burdens, that we can take his strength into the work that God is calling us to do. That we can put in proper relationship, that we spend time in the presence of Jesus, that he lifts our burdens, that he carries our burdens, that he reminds us of who we are, and then we can continue to do the good he wants us to do.